Okay, hello everyone. This is the last lesson that will be included in your second examination, the measures of variability. So after the measures of central tendency, another set of measurement that we are going to discuss is the measures of variability, or that is also known as the measures of dispersion or variation. So what are the objectives for this particular topic? At the end of the lesson, you are expected to identify the different measures of variability and to calculate or to solve the variability of the given set of data. We will be focusing much more on the group data. So for the ungroup, this is the scenario so that we will understand what is the meaning of variability and how does it differ with the previous lesson, which is all about the central tendency. So take for example the scores of the two groups. We have the boys and the girls. So we have 5 members from both teams. So the boys got the following scores. As you can see, we have 70, 95, 60, 80, and 100. If we are going to compute for the overall mean of this group, the mean is 81. The other group, we have 82, 80, 83, 81, 79. The group of girls, they also got the same mean, that is 81. So one way to describe a data set is by getting the central tendency. And we have used the mean because that is the most reliable measure of central tendency. So based on this particular set of data, even though we have two different groups, but we can say that they have the same mean. If you are going to get one score that will describe the performance of the two groups, that is 81. So even though we have different entries, we can say that the performance of the boys and the performance of the girls are just the same based on the mean. So if we will just focus on the measures of central tendency, that will only be one dimension of the scoring. How about sobrahan yung slide? So if we are going to return to that particular slide, makikita niyo ang kaibahan ng kanilang mga graph, and that talks about the spread or the variability of the data. And when we are talking about variability, the closer the data set are, the better is the performance. So if we are going to look at the two, much better ang performance ng girls kasi mas dikit-dikit ang kanilang data as compared sa boys na very spread out. Kasi sa variability dapat mas uniform, much better. That is the rule. So definition of variability, and the formal definition is given in this particular slide, and I will read. It is a measure of variability if it is a summary value that represents the amount of dispersion or spread in a data set as represented a while ago by the graph. Gaano ba kakalat ang scores? Gaano ba kakalat ka-spread out ang data? So mas makalat siya, mas spread out siya, it's not good or it's worse compared to the data set na mas dikit siya ang value. In statistics, variability is synonymous to dispersion and spread, which denote the width of the distribution. And this particular measurement is not captured by the central tendency. So here is a picture of the variation of the variability of a particular data. That can be seen in graph. But if we are going to look at what are the other ways to know the spread or the dispersion of the data set? Again, we will look into the ungrouped data first. We have the range. That's the difference between the highest and the lowest observation, and we have already tackled this before when we constructed the frequency distribution table. So highest minus lowest, if we are going to use the same example a while ago, for the boys, we have 100 as the highest and 60 as the lowest. Therefore, they got the range of 40. For the group of the girls, the highest scorer got 83 while the lowest one is 79. So the difference between that highest and lowest observations is equal to 4. So, dito pa lang makikita natin na mas malaki ang value ng range ng boys kaysa sa girls. So, we can definitely say that mas uniform, mas homogeneous, that's the term that we are using, ang data ng mga babae kaysa sa lalaki. The girls are more homogeneous than the boys in terms of math ability based on that given data. So that is how you interpret the data about the boys and the girls scores. Another way to get the variability of a data set aside from the range is the mean deviation. So mean deviation is the average of the summation of the absolute value or the absolute deviation. As you can see, we have the symbol for the absolute value. So the absolute deviation means ano yung kanyang yung gap niya, or the term is gaano siya kalayo, yeah, that's true, kalayo from the mean. So that is why mean deviation. So kung ito ang score niya, gaano ba siya kalayo from the mean? So that is also spread out. Gaano siya ka-spread out from the mean. That is why it's called the mean deviation. And to be understood, the example. First, we are going to compute for the mean deviation of the boys. So nandito ang mga names nila, nandito ang mga score nila, and we can get the mean. The mean is 81. Pero we are going to use the mean na 81 to get the deviation of each score. So ano yung deviation ni Frederick, for example, from the mean? So you just get the difference, the score of that particular person and the average, which is 81. Take note, 81 yung lumabas kanina sa computation. So let's have 70 minus 81. It's supposedly negative 11, but we are using the absolute value, so all the answers are positive. 95 minus 81, that's for Russell, it's 14. 60 minus 81 for Murphy, that's 21. It's absolute value, that's why it's positive. And so on and so forth. So all of these values are the deviation from the mean. Gaano siya kalayo from the mean. And since we're going to have the summation of all these values, we will add 11, 14, 21, 1, and 19. We got 66. And applying the formula, we have the summation of the deviation divided by the number of observations. So, 5 sila na given data. So, 66, the sum, divided by 5. That will give us 13.2 as the mean deviation of the boys. For the group of the girls, we have 82 minus 81. They have the same mean, diba? So, 82 minus 81, that's 1. 80 minus 81 is negative 1. Absolute value of that is positive 1. And so on and so forth. So we got the values 1, 1, 2, 0, and 2. Then, let's have the summation of all these deviations from the mean. That's 6. And divide that particular number by the number of observations. So 5 girls were involved. Divided by 5 to 1.2. So comparing the two values a while ago, may 13 point something yung boys, masyadong malaki. Yung girls, only 1. Still supported by the conclusion that the girls are more homogeneous than the boys. So in other words, mas okay ang performance ng mga girls kaysa sa mga boys, kaya they are almost uniform or homogeneous. I'm talking about the performance of the girls. Variance is the third measurement of variation, and that is the average of the square deviation from the mean. So this is closely connected to the mean deviation, but the only difference is, as you can observe, sa formula niya, meron siyang square. So yung deviation ng every score or value mo sa dataset will be squared. Then, you just follow the summation, you get all the sum of those, pero square ang kukunan natin ng sum divided by the number of observation. Pero take note, we are not using the population variance because usually when we are conducting research, we are doing sampling technique. So we will focus on this particular formula for the sample variance. So that is summation of the quantity of x sub I minus x bar, your mean, squared, divided by n minus 1. So take note, n minus 1 ang ating denominator because we are dealing with sample variance. So if we will have the same example, yung boys' performance and girls' performance in math, then we will have this table. So, wala na yung absolute value. So, we can see negative values in our deviation. But it's okay. It doesn't matter because i-square natin yan siya. So, whether negative siya or positive, magiging positive pa rin ang value niya. So, ito na siya yung square values ang ating kukunan ng sum. So, we have 11, negative 11 squared, that's 121, 14 squared, 196, and so on and so forth. So, the squares will all be added. That will be the summation of the deviation squared. That's the numerator. And since we are using the sample variance, then we will have 5, the number of observation, minus 1. So, 4 na lang siya. So, that's 280. As for the girls group, we will do the same thing as what we did a while ago. We are going to square the deviation of every entry. So, we have 1 squared, still 1. 1. We have 2 for 2 squared, 0 for 0 squared, and 2 for 2 squared. And add all of these numbers, then we got 10. So the sum of the square of the deviation is 10 divided by the number of observation minus 1. So that's 4. It's 2.5. Still, the girls got a lower value. It means that they have a more uniform or homogeneous performance with each other. As compared to boys, very spread out because of 280. That's a very large value. Variance, and if we got the variance, it's very easy for us to get the standard deviation because they are just related. Standard deviation is just the square root of the variance. So the positive square root of the variance is indeed the standard deviation. So if we have already come up with the values of the S squared, the variance, yung kanina sa boys 280, we will just use our calculator and get the positive square root of that. So the positive square root of 280 is 16.37. Therefore, the standard deviation of the group of the boys for their performance is 16.73. While for the girls, if they got 2.5 as their variance, the square root of 2.5 is approximately 1.58, rounded off up to the nearest hundredths, and that is the standard deviation of the girls. So, naka-highlight yung mga standard deviation nila. We can still say that 1.5 is less than 16.73. Therefore, the girls are more homogeneous, less spread out ang kanilang data set. And between the two, we have to prefer the performance of the girls over the boys kasi the closer the values, the more uniform, the better. That is the rule for the variability. So I think that we are done with the group data. We will now proceed with the group data, how to compute for the variability of the group data. But we will now consider yung last two types of the standard deviation and the variance kasi yun siya ang ginagamit usually in research. So it follows then that a similar process will be observed in calculating both standard deviation and variance kasi kanina nakuha natin yung standard deviation by just getting the square root of the variance. So, hindi siya masyadong complicated because related lang yung dalawa. So, let's take the steps as well as the formula to get the sample. The sample variance for the group data. As you can see, meron siyang minus 1 sa denominator because we are dealing with the sample variance and sample standard deviation. So, please take note of this formula. S squared. May square pa siya because we are talking about variance. Pawawala tong square na to once we are getting the square root of the other side. So, yung S na lang ang maiiwan will be the formula for the standard deviation. So, please copy again. S squared is equal to the summation of the product of the frequency and the square of M sub P is the midpoint minus yung X na may it's supposedly bar here. This is the mean. So, in other words, you have to get the square of the deviation from the mean times the frequency. So, i-consider natin yung frequency because group data siya, hindi siya raw data ang binigay. So, we have to compute kung ilan ang mga numbers na nag-fall within that particular class interval. All over n minus 1. So, may minus 1 tayo is constant because we are talking about sample variance. So again, I would like to emphasize yung nasa numerator is the summation of the products of the square of the difference of each class mark and the mean and its frequency. So kunin muna natin yung class mark Tapos, i-minus natin. So, na-compute natin na mean for that particular group data. And then, after enumerating all of the values of the deviation from the midpoint to the mean, i-multiply natin siya by itself. So, that is squaring the value. Pag na-square na natin siya, dyan na natin siya i-multiply sa frequency. Then, after that, the results will be added. So, summation of the product of f and the square of mp minus x bar, that will be our numerator. Denominator is... So, how to calculate? We have the steps. First is you need to have the value for the mean kasi wala kang i-minus sa midpoint mo kung wala kang mean. Second one is get the deviations by finding the difference of each class mark or midpoint from the mean. So, kailangan mong magawa ng another column para isulat lahat ng difference ng class mark or midpoint. The other term for class mark is midpoint. They are just the same. Minus yung mean ng bawat isa. So, after getting that, another column will be made, the square of the deviations. And finally, after getting that, you have to get the summation and substitute in the formula for the variance. So, let's apply these steps in this particular problem. So, meron tayong class dito, the class limits or the class interval. First column, we have 28 to 29, 26 to 27, and so on and so forth. Frequency on the second column, we have 4, 9, 12, and so on. That will give us the sum of 100. Midpoint is the third one. Midpoint is obtained again by getting the average of the upper limit and the lower limit of your class interval. That's why we have 28.5, 26.5, 24.5, and so on. Ang sinabi doon sa step is after getting this is we need to get the square of our... nandito pa yung square ng midpoint tsaka yung frequency. So we have to get first the mean. So number 4, this is not included actually in the steps, pero since we are getting the mean, and based on our previous lesson in getting the mean for the group data, we need to find the product of our frequency and midpoint or the class mark. So kahit na-change yung term niya, naging midpoint na siya, it's actually the class mark of our previous lesson. So multiply 4 times 28.5, 114. 9 times 26.5, you have 238.5, and so on and so forth. This is important, the fourth column, yung binabasa ko ngayon na mga values, 114, 238.5, and so on. Get the summation of this. This is very important to get our mean. So the summation of this column, that's 2014, divided by the number of elements in this particular data, 100, that will give us a mean of 20.14. So, pwede tayong magdagdag ng column for the mean, that's 20.14, that's uniform, or pwede wala na. Idiretso na natin sa calculator natin because the next column that is very important in computing for the variance is the deviation of the midpoint from the mean. So, meron kang midpoint dito sa third column, we have 28.5 minus itong mean na na-compute natin na 20.14. So, we have 8.36 as the entry for our column number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Column number 6, row number 1, 8.36. Again, that's 28.5, the midpoint, minus the mean, 20.14. You will do the same process sa second part, 26.5 minus 20.14, that's 6.36. And so on and so forth. So, midpoint minus mean, para makumpleto mo yung column number 6. After that, you need to square each value of column number 6 to get the column number 7, which is the square of the deviation. The first entry of that column is 69.89 because square mo yung 8.36 using your calculator, and so on and so forth. So after the squaring, so you can get 40.45 as the second entry, 19.01, 5.57 rather, and so on and so forth. After that, kompleto na yung column number 7 mo. The last column will be, yung column number 7 mo will be multiplied to column number 2. That is why you have the entry f times the square of the deviation of the midpoint and the mean. So you have those values kasi na-multiply mo sila. After that, after getting all those values with the help of your calculator, you can get now the sum to get the summation of the deviation of MP and X squared. That is why the value is 1,747. So yung nabilugan ko, yung last part, second to the last column, yun siya ang deviation squared, di ba? Deviation of the mean and the midpoint squared. Multiply that to your frequency. So 4 ang frequency of that particular class. That is why you have 279.56. And you will do the same process sa second, third, at to the last class interval. Square root of the variance. So, hassle na mga steps to make, you just continue whatever you have started with your variance. And another trivia, standard deviation is considered as the most reliable measure of variability. It is affected by the individual values or items in the distribution. So sa statistical data na binabasa natin sa research, ang present talaga doon is standard deviation, yung square root ng variance. Aside sa it is smaller kasi nakuha na yung square root niya from the variance, it is also the value that is more of describing siya sa overall data when it comes to variability sa standard deviation because it is considering the individual values of the distribution. So kung sa central tendency siya, katulad siya ng mean kasi it is obtained by getting all the values of that particular data set or distribution. So kung ang mean ang most reliable measurement for central tendency, the most reliable one for the measures of variability is the standard deviation. So nawala na yung 2 dito, yung S squared, kasi naging S na siya because we are now dealing with standard deviation. And as you can see, meron ng square root sign yung nasa right hand side of the equation. As that, kung babalikan natin yung example kanina, we will have the same steps to be followed. We will just follow the same example also para clear. So we are down with the last column number 8. Itong product of the deviation squared and the frequency, we got the summation of this, that's 1,747.08. Natin kanina yung standard, yung variance. So ngayon, square root na lang siya. So ipagpatuloy lang natin yung table na nagawa natin kanina, and as you can see kanina kasi is nag-round off tayo up to 2 decimal places because we thought that that is the final answer already, the standard deviation. Pero if you are going to get the square root, do not get the square root of the estimated value. So i-divide mo talaga yung totoong value ng 1747.08 divided by 99 and do not round off the answer. Do not estimate the answer. You get the square root of that and doon ka na magkuha ng last 2 decimal places up to hundredths place. Doon ka na magkuha for your final answer. That is 4.20 for the standard deviation. So I hope that's clear with you. That is how to get the standard deviation of a particular data set. Anyway, kung na-try kong isolve, whether you use yung kaninang value with this one, kasi 17.65 yung value kanina sa standard deviation, square root of that, it's still 4.20. Pero kung kukunin natin yung overall value talaga ng 47.09 divided by 99 is actually 17.6473. Yun siya dapat ang kukunan natin ng square root because there are times na pag estimated yung value ng ating kukunan ng square root, it will be different. So for us to have a uniform answer, again, the rule is do not round off your answer if you are still on the process of solving. So that's all for our lesson about the measures of variability. This is just a lecture video, and if you have some questions, just send me your questions and we will still meet virtually via Google Meet. Your exercises will also be posted in Quipper, and we will also have a quiz about this particular lesson. So thank you so much. That would be all for our lesson. Measures of variability. Thank you.